Hello, and welcome back to The Voiced Self. I'm Holly Saxon, a vocal massage therapist, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host,
Eve Mitterhuber, a speech and language therapist. Thanks for tuning in. Each month, we explore the voice not just as a tool, but as an extension of who we are.
Today, we're diving into something that comes up in a lot of sessions with our clients, and that is the emotional landscape of the voice.
Yeah, so how we're feeling shows up in the voice, and how we can gently build confidence and self-trust when we're speaking or singing.
And just a note before we start, we both want to say that we are not psychologists or psychotherapists, and we'll be talking about the emotional aspects of the voice from our perspectives only. So that's the perspectives as a speech and language therapist and a vocal massage therapist. If you are struggling with deep or ongoing anxiety, please do reach out to a qualified mental health professional for support.
Absolutely. So let's get into it by thinking about some reasons why the voice can be so tightly linked with our emotions. Our voices are tied to our identity, and so when we speak or sing, we're not just producing sound, we're expressing self. That's why anxiety can feel so raw in the voice.
Absolutely. And I think we both know that when someone says my voice shook in that meeting, they're not just describing a sound, they're describing a moment of vulnerability. It's not the voice that's just shaking, it's their whole self.
Yeah, and physiologically, anxiety often shows up as muscle tension or shallow breathing. It can even be presented with changes in pitch in the voice, and the voice ends up reflecting exactly what's happening in the body as well.
And because of that, people often fear their voice betraying them. And I've definitely experienced that myself, which we can talk a bit about later on. But this ironically adds more tension, and then we make the whole cycle worse, and round we go. So, what does voice anxiety actually look or feel like? For me, working hands-on with clients, I notice definitely the jaw clenching, the tension in the chest and the shoulders, particularly in those neck muscles. And then that in turn actually leads to tightness in the larynx, which I think is less obvious, but a kind of knock-on symptom of the other items.
It's interesting the things that you feel when you are feeling clients, and I'd be interested to know when they come to you whether they feel that in themselves. Do they have a conversation with you and recognize that tension before they come and have that massage?
So yeah, that's actually really interesting because often they don't notice that they've got that tension. So I had a girl come to me who was having trouble with reaching some notes, not particularly high notes, but she was just feeling like she was struggling to hit her range from low to mid and then into the upper. And when I asked if she was feeling any tension in her chest, shoulders, back, or even in her jaw, she didn't identify any prior to us having the session. And in the session, I work through warming up these areas because they all lead to that tension and tightness in the larynx. And so loosening off all of the areas that I thought might be impacting from the jaw, the shoulders, neck, etc. And it was only at the end of that session when her larynx was looser and she felt the ability to move through those pitches better that she actually said to me, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much tension I was holding."
That's really interesting. It's amazing how the body can hold things that we don't even recognize, right? And from a speech and language therapy perspective, in my sessions, I might often hear how the changes are presented in the voice. So I might hear some tightness or some hoarseness or breathiness. I might also hear a bit of a wavering tone or fast rate of speech. Sometimes people might come into my clinic and they might even tell me that they avoid speaking altogether because they might be worried about being heard wrong or that people will judge them for how their voice sounds. Now, a lot of people who come into my clinic will have some sort of voice diagnosis from an ear, nose and throat consultant, and often we can focus solely on the pathology given, but when we dive a bit deeper and consider that more often than not, there's likely to be some sort of psychological impact of having voice difficulties, it can unlock a completely new level of understanding of their vocal presentation. Now, we all have emotions and we all have a voice. So I often try to help people with recognizing this link by thinking about how they might hear other people's voices. Now, if you call up a friend or a family member, you can normally hear how they're feeling within the first second or two of hearing their voice. You know, if they've got a low, croaky tone and a slow rate of speech, you might be able to tell that they're feeling low or feeling tired or might be unwell. But if they have maybe a higher pitch, more energy in their voice, you can tell that they might be feeling a bit brighter. So sometimes linking it to how we hear other people's voices can be a really good indication of actually what might be going on within our own voice.
I find that really interesting, Eve, and it's such a good point. And I've never actually thought about it from that angle myself, even working in the voice space, that you're right, you know instantly how another person is feeling or how they're showing up with their voice. And our voice does show up everywhere. So ordering a coffee, speaking up in a meeting, even just saying your name in a group setting, that can be nerve-wracking and cause anxiety for some people.
Exactly. Emotions like anxiety can show up anywhere for anyone, whether it's on stage doing a performance or just in a supermarket queue.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think of an example from my own experience, actually, when anxiety has caused voice issues, if you like. And I think the most recent example I can refer back to is interview process. So interviewing for a job, and we all know that the interview process is pretty nerve-wracking. You know, you've got nerves in general just because of the setting. You've got nerves because you're potentially presenting something to experts, and you've got nerves because you want to do the job well. You want to prove yourself, right? And in my example, I had done a lot of preparation, and I think that does help alleviate anxiety in to some degree. So I knew what I was going to say. I knew how I was going to say it, and the themes and examples that I wanted to call on. But actually, in the moment, when I was in the room and when I started to speak, I felt really nervous. My throat felt tight. I noticed that I felt quite breathless. My speech was a little bit quicker, and I almost felt like I couldn't get enough air to breathe and to create my voice as I know it day to day. What also happened was I started to get a really runny nose. So everything was just working against me almost, and that I couldn't get my voice out initially to say what I wanted to say. So I took a pause. I took a couple of deep breaths, reset myself, and then just took my time starting to get into it. I think for the first few slides, I was still quite nervous and did feel it, but I was really focusing on ungrounding myself, being present and just breathing, slowing things down, and then naturally started to get into it, and those nerves and anxious feelings faded off.
That's a really good example, Holly. And I think anyone who's had a job interview has probably felt that. It sounds like when you were going through the process and doing a presentation, that must have been particularly nerve-wracking. And of course, you know, knowing what you do know about your voice, you were able to use those tools to help. And I also had a similar experience with vocal anxiety recently. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was delivering a speech at my sister's wedding, which I was very excited to do, but of course also very nervous. And as I was experiencing the build up during the day, you know, during the meal, I noticed that my heart rate started to increase and I got a bit of a lump in the throat, some tightness in my chest and some difficulties breathing. classic signs of anxiety, which for me, once I noticed this, took a breath, calmed myself down, and actually then once I started my speech, it all sort of calmed down and improved. And it's normal for things like this to happen. And this just shows that people like Holly and I, who do have some experience in voice, we experience those things as well.
And I think what's really important here, Eve, is that however experienced you are, I guess from my example of the interview process, whether you're at the beginning of your career or further along it, we all experience nerves and vocal anxiety, and that is okay. The emotions that drive anxiety and excitement are the same. And actually, it's being able to think about it and reframe it in that regard and take those nerves and that anxiety and turn it into that excitement and enjoyment. And when you can do that, flip that anxiety into excitement, it makes the whole thing a lot more enjoyable. But also what I don't want to distract away from is that feeling of vulnerability, because we are human. And in some cases that can help us to relate to others, help us to connect and create a sense of strength and supportive community.
That's such a good point, Holly. And I think as a speech therapist, sometimes when I'm with my voice clients, I can experience my own voice difficulties, and these can be particularly difficult to manage if I'm feeling a little bit unwell, or during really busy days where I'm using my voice a lot, speaking quite a lot. And when I expect quite high things with my voice, what actually can be quite useful is to let go of that expectation and to bring it into the conversation with my clients about what I may be experiencing with my voice, where it's relevant to bring that into the conversation. And that allows me to show up more authentically and to relate to these people a bit more as well, because it just shows that it's a real thing that we can experience. And therefore, by having those conversations, sometimes that's all that's needed to make mine and maybe their voice feel a little bit more relaxed as a result.
I really like that, Eve. And I think that sense of almost perfection is what can be a real challenge, particularly for the clients that I see who are professional voice users for in the singing space. So there is high competition to get into the roles that they're competing for. And that sense of having to be perfect and having to be perfect for a long time and consistently perfect over a period of time causes the tension in the body, which we know then leads to the tightness in the larynx and then the inability to perform. So it's putting that pressure of being perfect all the time on yourself, which then can cause that vicious circle. What I'm trying to get to is some sort of balance between this perfection and vulnerability to like you said, be authentic, but also to alleviate some of that stress.
I think that's a really interesting point. And often we set expectations for ourselves and how our voice may present. And I suppose if the voice doesn't show up as we want it to, that in itself can then create its own anxieties around it. Something else that can often also underpin voice anxiety is imposter syndrome.
Yeah, so I've definitely felt that in the past. And the thought of who am I to speak? What if I say something that doesn't fit with the crowd? What if they don't like me after I've said what I want to say? And even for people who've delivered big presentations or sung in front of huge audiences, they haven't always done that with ease. And they often experience that imposter syndrome feeling somewhere along the way. Eve, I don't know how much the imposter syndrome presents itself in the cases that you get to see. Do you want to talk a little bit about it from a therapy perspective?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think a lot of people do experience imposter syndrome. It's not one actually that often comes into my conversations, but I wonder if it's a little bit more nuanced than naming it as such. It's interesting that this has come up at a time that we were talking about job interviews and starting a new job. I think a lot of people, when they go into a new environment where they don't know what's going to happen necessarily, they can feel a little bit of that, like an alien in disguise. And I think when we reflect on our capabilities, we often focus on our doubts and be a bit more self-critical than we should be. That can also then show up in the voice, that in itself will bring more anxiety. And I think that those doubts, that nervousness in various environments can show with shakiness, with a quiet voice. We can again reflect how we're feeling in our voices without even meaning to.
Yeah, I think just an interesting point on that imposter syndrome part is, I think for me, if you don't feel like you fit or you don't feel like you've got value to add, that creates a vulnerability in yourself. And then that vulnerability shows up in how you present. Like you said, when you phone your friend, you know instantly if they're feeling good or happy or sad or worried. And I think for me, it's that everything that's going on inside of you from a psychological and physical perspective shows up as anxiety because you're feeling like an imposter. And I just think that's really interesting how that's all knitted together. Um, biomechanics of it all, the psychology of it all, that it can create not just an impact on the way you sound, but the way that you present as an overall person and an overall identity.
I think that's a really good point. And also then often in the things that you do. So often we will do things when we're feeling more vulnerable. We may do things that protect ourselves. Everyone is different, but I think even seeking support shows an element of vulnerability. And say, even clicking on a podcast like this, for example, you have demonstrated some vulnerability in seeking a little bit more information and joining the conversation around voice. We're always doing things that make us feel vulnerable. And I suppose everyone is different in how they respond to that. But the voice is often a big part of that.
And I think when we think about the other end of the scale, so we've got imposter syndrome on one side, and then I think we've got something that's referred to as success amnesia on the other, where someone is so productive, so driven, so outcome focused almost, that they achieve so much over and over and over again on a repeat cycle. There's no imposter syndrome there, or at least from the outside, there isn't. They deliver, but they forget the past achievements as soon as they've happened, almost replacing that success instantly with something else or the next thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like the brain can erase the evidence of how capable it is because it's done so much, it's used to being overproductive. And then we can start to cling to doubt and then the voice can carry quite a lot of self-criticism.
Yeah. So Eve, do you see the success amnesia more linked to imposter syndrome, or from my perspective, I've described it as sort of two ends of a scale. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting conversation. I think the two can go hand in hand, really. I think success amnesia, when we lose sight of the things that we do, it can sit alongside imposter syndrome, because if we're doing something and feeling a little bit out of the loop, we can then go to a default of keep doing it and not bringing it into the conversation. So from that perspective, I think we could keep, as feeling like an imposter, we can keep working or achieving whatever it is that we want to achieve, and not recognize that we're achieving these things, hence the success amnesia.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was looking at it from a slightly different angle of, imposter syndrome almost stopping you doing things, and success amnesia sort of almost overachieving, if you like, and forgetting what's been done. But I think it's interesting, those two different perspectives.
It is interesting, and I can totally see that from the other side as well. I think probably everyone reacts to these two things differently. So I think for me, I would expect it probably to depend on how you react to feeling that, and then what that might do. Linking it back to the voice, I think how we respond to these feelings can then show up in the voice. So if, say, we respond to how your perspective might have been, Holly, in that we feel the imposter syndrome, and that leads to maybe some reduced productivity and sort of overthinking, worry, concern, anxiety, that might show up in maybe a voice becoming a little bit lower, a little bit hoarser, maybe someone becoming a bit more quiet, speaking more slowly. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, it might then lead to a kind of overproductivity and perceived high levels of energy. But I think that can sometimes be a mask as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see that side of things. So yeah, either quietening the self or overcompensating and creating, like you say, that mask to hide behind. Um, really interesting. And I think that's a key point to call out, that we will all refer to imposter syndrome and even success amnesia with our different perspectives and different thoughts on how we think it might show up for us. And that's okay, right? I think the important thing is that we recognize when we're feeling it, or how it's, I guess, how it's impacting our day to day and impacting our voice, and then potentially taking steps to overcome that, knowing and being more aware of what's going on and how it sits for you.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to mention it. We're not experienced in psychology or psychotherapy or qualified to do so. So these are more our opinions, our perspectives of these things over anything else. Okay, so along those lines, we could start to think about some simple strategies, one of which is keeping a voice wins journal. So you could write down some moments when your voice has supported you, if that's maybe leading a meeting or telling a story to a friend or reading to your child.
Yeah, because I think, like we've highlighted, it's confidence isn't just built on one big performance. It's built on remembering and repeating small everyday successes. And those everyday successes look different for everyone as well, right? What might be an everyday success to you might not be to someone else, and that is also okay. I think removing that comparison to others and really focusing on your everyday successes is key to take away. And then having that memory bank of your own helps to soften any feelings that you might have about lacking voice or lacking qualities or skills or whatever it might be, and just reminding yourself and your voice that you've done it before and you can do it again. And actually, if you haven't done it before, apply those same techniques to something new and you can do it again.
That's a really good tip, Holly. And I think when we have these things written down for reflection, it makes them a bit more solid as well. It puts them there as concrete evidence for those successes, to give you again that reassurance that you've done it before and you can do it again. So let's now think about maybe what we can do in the moment. And the first step to this, I would say, is awareness. Simply noticing when and where your voice feels tight. You can even name it if you want to. You can say, I feel anxious, and begin to release that tension.
Yeah. And for me, I use a technique which is connecting with my body. So you can either place a hand on your chest or belly and release your shoulders, again, noticing the breath, creating some space for your voice to come through. But what I like to do is actually just ground myself. So either with my feet on the floor and just really being aware of that connection between my feet and the ground. Or also you can use your fingers if you're in a setting where you might not feel comfortable to put your hand on your chest or belly. You can just use some gentle finger taps. So putting your index finger on your thumb, for example, is your go-to, and just really recognizing that sensation of finger on thumb and grounding yourself. You can also listen back to episode 2, Untangling Vocal Tension, for some more practical tools and techniques.
I really like that, Holly. I was just following along as you were doing that, and it's helped to ground me, just to connect me back. And gentle warm-ups are also really powerful. These don't have to just be for performances, but actually they can be as an act of self-kindness. A soft hum or a gentle lip trill that can tell the nervous system that you're safe.
I like that humming. That's actually used a lot in yoga. It's called buzzing breath. So you can either make your sound like a bee, if you like, as you make that sound out, or you can create that soft hum, and that's to reset the nervous system and create a sense of safety and relaxation. Another favourite of mine is actually exhaling with a long sigh or a series of sighs, which naturally can lengthen the breath, release breath or tight breath, and calm the body. So almost 2 shorter exhales and then that final long sigh. So I'm just going to do it breathing in. And what I like to do alongside that is just put a finger on my chest. So when I'm taking that breath in, I'm almost straightening my back and opening my chest by placing my finger almost at the bottom of my rib cage. And that's allowing me to get more breath in. And also it's grounding me.
That felt really useful, really relaxing. And I suppose your confidence with this will grow with practice. And as you practice, it's almost like you'll be gently training your nervous system to feel safe with your own sound.
And some of these techniques might not work for you and others might. You also might want to do a variation of some of them. And again, depending on the setting you're in, you might want to do something a little bit more conspicuous. If you're sitting in a meeting or going to present, then you want to be doing something that the audience aren't necessarily going to notice as much. So taking away what works for you, I think is really important, and adapting some of these to fit with you and your personality. And remembering what we talked about earlier, that confidence doesn't mean that nerves disappear. It means that carrying your voice with you, even when nerves are there, is really, really important.
Yeah, that's so true. And thinking along those lines of confidence, actually, I often find that confidence can be misunderstood, and people can often think about it as being the loudest person in the room or having everyone listen to you as soon as you speak. But actually, what confidence is about is your voice aligning with your intention and you being able to feel self assured that you have your voice and you can use it to express yourself.
And I really, really like that. And I think made reference to a book alongside the last podcast, which is The Art of Shouting Quietly by Peter Molsey. So that link is in the last podcast if you want to reference it. True confidence is when you stop trying to sound like someone else and you embrace the unique quirks, textures, volume of your own voice. It's not about trying to compare yourself. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's about truly allowing yourself and your voice to shine.
Absolutely, Holly. Confidence is also not a destination, it's a practice. And it's not something you achieve instantly either. It's something that you will build gently over time, and it may also fluctuate, and that's okay.
So today we've explored how anxiety, imposter syndrome, and confidence all weave through the voice, and how the body holds it or doesn't hold it, and how we can begin to support the voice and our body and understanding it better with compassion.
If you've ever felt your voice shake, remember, you're not alone, especially as me and Holly have been there and still do go there sometimes. And your voice is still worthy of being heard.
And I think for me, that's a real key takeaway, that we are all worthy of being heard. And maybe for you as a listener, it's actually speaking up maybe a little bit more, even if you feel like what you're going to say is silly or like you don't think it adds value. Just start to be a bit more brave and just give it a go. That's part of your personality. Let it out and let it shine. We would also love to hear your reflections. So, have you noticed how your emotions show up in your voice? Anything that you'd like us to cover on a future show? Share with us on Instagram or leave us a comment on Spotify.
If you've enjoyed this episode, which we hope you have, why not follow us and share the podcast with a friend and fellow voice user?
Next time, we'll be talking about the role of voice in communication and self expression. So, how the voice can impact personal connection, your professional presence, and your authentic self in real world scenarios.
Until then, take care of your voice and take care of yourself.